Hi, it's Dre Greg of City Wisdom. Today we answer the question, when is a retiree considered wealthy? There are a variety of ways that we can measure wealth, and we're going to talk about 5 of the most common ways to measure wealth today so that you can determine whether or not you would be considered wealthy as a retiree. For many of us when we retire, the number one thing we're going to measure wealth by is whether I can purchase all of my time. We talk about financial independence, this idea that I don't have to trade my time for money. I can spend all of my time doing whatever I want to do, and it does not impact the amount of money that I have being generated. Most of us, when we start our career, we don't have the necessary skills to leverage. So as a result, we're generally trading our time. I'm willing to work to learn the skills. I'm willing to devote myself to studying and building some sort of a certification or getting a college degree or whatever that looks like. We have to trade our time for our money. At some point in time, we're able to start generating more and more revenue based on how much time we've been at the company, how much time we've been working on a certification or any sort of a craft, whatever that skill set looks like, the more time that we put in, the more opportunity we have to generate more income. When we look at purchasing all of our time back, that means that I don't actually have my money tied to my income. My money is invested in other asset classes. Now, you guys know there's generally 3 asset classes when we talk about the 7 streams of income that the IRS says that they recognize. If you are invested in real estate, the stock market, or in some sort of a business profits, you will then have access to the 7 streams of income. Now, you all know the magic number is 3. When we look at the studies, they say that 65% of self made millionaires have at least 3 streams of income. So you decide what makes the most sense for you. And then when you're generating this income, you now have purchased all of your time back. There's a time of our life where I think we would all agree when I was 5 years old, the things that I liked, I didn't like at 10. And then the things I liked at 10, I didn't like at 15. Well, for many of us, when we start building our career and our lifestyle, when we're probably in our early 20s, we make a variety of decisions. We like everything that we're doing. We like the job that we have, the people that we work with. And maybe we travel a lot because when we're younger, we wanted to travel. But then when you have kids and a spouse, sometimes we want to be home a little bit more, or maybe even stuck in an airport a few times where you say, I don't want to sleep in the airport ever again. I don't think I want to travel as much. Even our military families, where they're willing to move overseas and they're willing to move every few years when we get married and we have kids, as they get older, we have to take more than our career advancement into consideration. And that's why about 80% of people generally are unhappy with their work. They're unhappy with the work because the situation they signed up for in their 20s, as they've gotten older, those situations have changed. They're not interested in traveling as much anymore. They're not interested in working 100 hours a week anymore. They have other priorities that they would like to allocate their time to. The problem that most of us face is because of the lifestyle we built, working 100 hours a week, whether it's in our business or whether we were just grinding, trying to build a career, or whether we took all the assignments in the military, so we're moving our way up the ranks, whatever that looks like, it's very hard for us to make adjustments to our lifestyle. So financial freedom becomes a great measurement of wealth. Number 2 on our list is our net worth. For most people, if you have liquid assets upwards of $1 million, most people would consider you wealthy. Now, you and I may say, well, I don't know if that's wealthy in 2024 because of inflation and things like that. But if you have the liquid assets, where what we're saying is if you logged into your bank account and you had $1 million sitting somewhere, most people would consider that wealthy. Being a millionaire still tends to be a great measurement because about 90% of the population is not a millionaire. So most people would say, all right, if you're in the top 10%, I would consider you wealthy. Others will say, well, I don't know about the top 10%, but maybe the top 5%. And then some will still say, how about the top 1%? That if you're a millionaire with kids and certain lifestyle, we see these professional athletes where they have millions of dollars and yet they don't seem to be able to maintain a lifestyle for the rest of their life. However, someone is going to measure your wealth based on your net worth. Generally, we do not include your household when we're talking about liquid assets, right? We're talking about your ability to have access to hold $1 million where you can fill up a suitcase like an old mafia movie. And because $1 million is not worth the same in different places, we normally would also take a look at our geographic location, our normal cost of living, whether I still can, as we mentioned in the first one, support my lifestyle with this money. If you're able to check off all these boxes, then it's normally a fair measurement of whether a retiree is wealthy or not. Number 3 on our list is debt-free living. And we're talking about all debt. Your mortgage is paid off, your student loans are paid off, your house is paid off. You've paid everything off. No credit cards, no debt whatsoever. Many people would consider debt-free living where you don't have the burden of paying any of these bills owing no man nothing but love, many people would say that person is considered wealthy. And I find that debt free living is normally a great measurement as well. And the reason that debt free living doesn't work for everyone is because there are things that is considered good debt. We don't talk about it a whole lot, but I do often like to remind people of the idea that the measurement of whether or not that would be a good loan for me personally would be what type of money am I generating from this investment? I remember when I got my first business started. So the very first business that I registered with the government and actually was paying taxes on was a photo booth company. And I remember there was someone who was selling his photo booth business, and this was over 10, 15 years ago. And it was for like $30,000. It was nothing crazy. But when I was looking at what he was offering, I was like, well, he's not really offering anything. And so then I started looking at what it would take to get a photo booth. And I found that you basically could just buy one and then you could buy leaves and you can go to these different events and then you can basically start the business, that you don't have to buy the business from someone else. And I think at the time I got a loan for $25,000, and that would be basically considered what we would say is like a payday loan, like a predatory loan. But I felt if I was able to get this $25,000, buy these two photo booths, and then I was going to make on average like $300 an hour, that I would be able to pay that back at a rate that exceeds what the amount of the loan was. And that's exactly what happened. I was able to pay back the $25,000 within the first year of operating my photo booth business. Now, the interest rate was probably like 30%. It was a very high interest rate, but I knew that as long as I was able to generate the revenue, then I'll be able to pay it back and I'd be fine. On the other end, if you were able to get a 3% loan and you did nothing with that money but leave it in a bank account, well, you're actually paying more in interest than you're generating. So that would be a bad loan. And I guess what I'm basically saying is that sometimes if we're buying an asset or we're getting access to money, it's not always whether or not we have the debt, it's what we're doing with the debt. You and I would probably say buying a home, having a shelter over your head is pretty important. So we'll put that one on the shelf over here on the side. But a lot of the other things that we buy, we have to really look at, what am I doing with this extra money? Am I going on a trip? How important is that trip? How many paychecks is it going to take me to pay back that trip? Is that really worth it for me? Now, you may decide, well, yes, that's worth it for me. It's peace of mind. I'm going crazy at work and I'm going to have a mental breakdown. Well, yes, then it's worth your health. So obviously that would be a very clear decision for you. But if we're just spending the money for spending the money's sake, and we're not able to do anything except we're borrowing money to buy something, that if I just took $100 from each of my check over the next 4 months, I could have bought it without paying any interest on any loan. Well, I would say that's probably a better situation. So when you look at debt-free living, we really want to take a step back. And what we're really saying is things that are depreciating assets, we don't want to have long loans on that. So that's really your automobiles and things like that. You and I know as soon as we take it off the lot, it goes down in value. We don't want to have an interest rate that's tied to something that's depreciating. We don't want to lose the investment. Also, we would normally say our credit cards. And the reason we talk about revolving credit is because those are very hard to pay off. The interest is compounding on that every single day. And so as a result, anytime you don't pay the balance off within that first 30 days, it becomes really difficult to pay off. However, someone who's funding their retirement with real estate, you may have more than one mortgage. And each of these mortgages, you might still be generating enough revenue where the mortgage is being paid off from the income that your property is generating. That would normally be considered an okay investment, because what's going to ultimately happen is whether you sell the property or not, you don't have to pay any of your money on that mortgage. And if you do, you're really doubling and tripling down on that mortgage just to get rid of it even quicker. You normally have some tax breaks where you get to write off some of the interest, and then you have different business expenses where you get to write off some of those. To where when you look at it holistically, you can see how all debt isn't equal. That it really is something that we should look at on a case by case basis. The fourth way for us to measure whether or not someone is wealthy is normally going to be your discretionary income. Just how much money can you spend freely without it impacting your long-term success of your retirement plan. If you're able to take these trips and cruises, if you're able to give money to causes that you believe in, volunteering and giving of your resources to different charities, if you're able to pay for your grandkids or great grandkids to go to school or to start a business or different things like that, if we have access to discretionary income, that's normally a great measurement of whether a retiree is wealthy or not. If you're able to just kind of wake up one day and on a whim do something and it has no long-term impact on your retirement plan, I would consider that wealthy. You're not thinking about money. You're just doing what brings you satisfaction, fulfillment, and joy. Now, granted, everything is relative. Maybe you can spend money on a Super Bowl ticket or go to a Beyonce concert or a Taylor Swift concert where This is something that is very difficult for a lot of people, but you're able to do that because you have the discretionary income. Most people would consider that to be a wealthy situation, a very successful and enjoyable situation. We know that upwards of 70% of people live paycheck to paycheck. We know the numbers say about 65% of people retiring today are considered broke, where they have less than $5,000 in any retirement investable asset. And so when you look at the amount of money that people are able to save, even the numbers that says that the majority of people don't have access to $1,000 liquid, when you look at the actual numbers across the board, a lot of people are stressing about money. A lot of people are worried about keeping food on the table, putting gas in the tank. And if their AC is to go out or the car is to break down, that they're probably going to have to put that on credit, or they're not going to be able to drive the vehicle or just live without their AC for a while because it's a very difficult and tough situation for them. So you can see why having access to discretionary income would be another great way to measure wealth. And then our fifth and final way to know as a retiree whether you're wealthy or not is normally going to be your estate plan, whether you're creating generational wealth. A lot of people, if you have children, you want to make sure that they're okay and that you're purchasing not only your freedom, not only your spouse's freedom, but your children's freedom or possibly your children's freedom. When you look at building generational wealth and a legacy, if you're able to leave a significant amount of money to the future generations, for most people, that would be another great measurement of wealth. If you would consider yourself wealthy, then maybe that means that you're able to leave $100,000 or $500,000 or $1 million. And in this particular measurement, you could count your properties. You can count the business, or you can count your investments, or you can count your house that you're living in. All of these would be measurements of wealth. Now, one of the measurements of generational wealth that I believe is very important, but is less talked about, is whether or not we're actually instilling the values and principles into our children. The numbers show that upwards of 70 to 90% of generational wealth is lost by the third generation. And there are a variety of reasons that people will use to explain this phenomenon. And I'm someone who believes that your better self equals your better wealth. And that's the idea that I had to become a different person to build this wealth. Now, you could just look at it from a straight one to one, where if someone was to become a doctor, they would make hundreds of thousands of dollars a year. Well, who did they have to become to do that? They would have had to go to college. They would have had to go to med school. They would have had to do a residency. So they would have had to invest in themselves at least another decade after high school graduation to become that type of a person. Well, if this doctor tried to pass their medical practice on to their children who have not gone to med school, who know nothing about the human anatomy, how long do you believe that that practice would last? If you take that principle and insert the idea of money, you and I had to become something to generate the revenue, whether we had to learn to serve others, whether we had to invest in ourselves and our education, whatever that looks like, we had to become someone to do that. So the first generation, you became the person to build the wealth. But our third generation, they never saw the transformation that we went through. They never experienced the investment that we made in ourselves, in our business, in our relationships, whatever that looked like. And so the third generation, never having seen that, they often waste the money. They don't have the wisdom that we had to learn to become the person to build that income. And so it becomes very important when you talk about generational wealth, not to only make sure the estate's set in a great way where we limit your taxes and make sure that your kids have access to the money. It's also important that we pass on a lot of that wisdom, a lot of that transformation that we went through, the books that we read, the revelations that we were taught. I tell my kids all the time that my job as a parent is to make sure I instill in you all of the lessons that I've learned over my life as early as I possibly can. And then as a result, when you're my age, you should be significantly further than I am. And then that's your job for the next generation. You should give them all the wisdom I gave you, all the wisdom you learned on your own, and then you give that to them as early as possible. And then as a result, they're able to extend that as well. Where generational wealth isn't as much about the money. Otherwise, we would just all have life insurance policies, and when we die, they would get the money and we'd be fine. But you and I know it takes a lot more than money. Otherwise, why would 80% of professional athletes be filing for bankruptcy within a few years of their retirement? Why would people winning the lottery within 3 years of winning the lottery be filing for bankruptcy? It's because they did not become a millionaire inside. They just had $1 million in the bank account. And so as a result, the money ultimately goes back to the people who know how to generate the $1 million. And so it's important that we help our family to become millionaires internally, so that way they get to keep the money. It's more valuable for them to have the transformation internally than necessarily to have the money externally. Ultimately, wealth and retirement is not just about the numbers. It's about having the wisdom to make sound decisions about your money, life, and happiness, that gives you the peace of mind that you deserve in retirement. If you found value in this video, I simply ask for you to like and subscribe so you continue receiving valuable insights on how to build your own wealthy retirement system. Until next time, stay safe and enjoy life.